Hello, book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Nat Cat's Bookish Cafe. If there is one thing I love more than a spooky, atmospheric fall book, it's a queer, spooky, atmospheric fall book. Alright guys, I have brought out the black lipstick to make up for the fact that I have yet to decorate my shelves for the fall season. The weather here has just been too warm for that, but hopefully maybe next weekend or the weekend after that I will start getting more into the fall vibe when it comes to my decorations. But I did want to go ahead and get this video out for you so that you could potentially get them onto your fall TBRs. Today is the 13th and I have 13 wonderful queer fall spooky books to recommend you, and I'm so excited to talk about them. Before I get into them, I do have a playlist full of my past recommendations, and that does include recommendations for the fall season as well, so feel free to check those out. Of the 13 books that I'm talking about today, I don't physically own 3 of them, so I'm going to start out with those just because, knowing me, I will forget about them if I don't do them first. So let's jump into the first book. The first book on our list is going to be Blood Orange, and this is by Mars Adler. This is an author I discovered this year, and I've read a couple books by them that I've really enjoyed. While they usually write within the horror genre and their books are always queer, this book, I feel, out of the 2 that I read, definitely gives more fall vibes. We are following a trans college student named Graham, and he is a sculptor. In fact, he is a very talented sculptor. However, the sculptures that he creates really make people feel uncomfortable. So he's finding it hard to find success within the artistic world. In his past, he and his family lived in some low-income housing that ended up being torn down due to a wealthy family coming in and wanting to develop that area into a suburban neighborhood. And Graham has always held this against the family, especially because they never actually completed the project. So he and all these low-income families ended up being displaced for essentially no reason. One day he finds out that the daughter of the man who started this project is looking to continue the project and actually complete it. And he's just not going to stand for that. And so he goes to that neighborhood because she is going to be staying there in one of the homes. And he's like, I'm going to go ahead and break her windows, really kind of scare her away from here. However, as he's approaching the house, he is approached by this really beautiful being, and this being tells him, hey, that's not gonna work. So this being is obviously somewhat fae-like. Our character seems to have a slight recognition of this character, but he can't quite put his finger on it. This being is non-binary, so we have both non-binary and trans representation in this story. And this fae-like being asks him for his help in scaring away these developers for good. And so begins their partnership. Throughout the story, we definitely get those fall vibes of decay, of the land dying, and also the strength of the land to have the ability to come back again. I always think fae can definitely give more fall vibes, especially if you take a slightly darker route to their characteristics, which this author does. It obviously has a smidge of body horror in it as well. So I had a really good time with this story. It definitely is a story with a lot of vibes more so than plot. And I think in the fall time, a lot of times vibes is what people are looking for. So if you're looking for a very queer story with some commentary on the destruction of the environment brought on by people, especially by human greed, then this book is definitely for you, especially if you want just a smidge of romance in there as well. The second book we have is going to be Most Ardently by Gabe Cole Nova, and I'm actually reading another book by this author right now and having a good time with it. But this was the first book I read by them, and this is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice. And in this book, Elizabeth is actually Oliver, a young trans man who is obviously struggling to live their life as a woman, because in this time in history, and unfortunately modern day too, it is not really acceptable to present as trans. However, one day he stumbles across Darcy, and Darcy and his friend really treat him like a fellow man, and so he starts to develop a friendship with them and finds a lot of comfort in their presence, especially as their mother is pushing them to make a marriage match, which they are not at all interested in doing. I will admit, I have never read the original Pride and Prejudice. I have never seen any of the adaptations, so I'm honestly not that familiar with the story, so I can't tell you for sure how good of a retelling this is. However, for me, because it has those historical and almost kind of classic vibes to it, it definitely gives me fall vibes, because I, for some reason, associate classics with fall a little bit more than any other time of year. I also feel like the vibes of the cover are definitely, like the colors and everything definitely give fall. This is a really great book if you're looking for trans representation within a historical setting. On top of that, we are obviously also following Darcy, who is a queer man during a time where being queer in general is not accepted either. So there are lots of different forms of representation in this story. I really enjoy the fact that this is more of a slower build of a relationship, and that it is young adult, so it isn't as focused on like the physical relationships so much as these characters growing with the assistance of each other and becoming the people they have always wanted to be, because they are creating this safe space for each other. So this is a really feel-good story. It's definitely not spooky, but this is definitely a book that would be great for the fall time if you're looking for a sweet little romance. The final book that I don't physically own, we have You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kailyn Byron, and this is another young adult story. However, this one is definitely not sweet and not cozy. This is definitely giving more slasher vibes. It's giving campy. We are following Charity, and every summer she works at this camp where people can experience being in a slasher. So essentially they would go there and a bunch of people would be murdered and they would try to survive the night. And our character works there, and this summer she's very excited because she gets to play the final girl, which is like obviously the most coveted position. However, one night the murders aren't just fake. In fact, they're very real, and she and her co-workers start to realize that they are kind of stranded in this camp. It's very isolated. There's no cell service, and there is clearly a murderer amongst them, and they have to use all their slasher knowledge to try and survive the night. Charity is obviously an expert at all this, and she is dedicated to keeping her and her girlfriend alive. So this does have sapphic representation in it. The relationship between these two was very sweet. I really enjoyed that aspect, especially when it came to the end of the book. I think that this took a very interesting turn. I think this book is really for people who like a fun, fast-paced story, who like an isolated setting, who like a setting that slowly starts to reveal a darker past that that is clearly being repeated in this current timeline. So I had a lot of fun with it. I definitely recommend the audiobook. Getting into the physical reads, up first we have The Spirit Bares Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White. Obviously, I had to put one of their works on here. I have fallen in love with their work, despite the fact that I've only read 2 so far. I do have their other 2 books on my shelf patiently waiting to be read. I decided to go with this one because it also has a historical setting, and I feel like historical settings often add an extra layer to the spooky fall vibes. In this book, we are following another trans character, a young trans man who is part of a group of people who have essentially the ability to commune with the dead. However, only the men are supposed to actively commune with the dead, and the women aren't really that useful. Essentially, women with these violet eyes, that means you have the ability to commune with spirits, are only good for marriage and producing sons with violet eyes. And obviously our character has zero interest in doing that. In fact, he would like to be a surgeon and has very little interest in having anything to do with this organization. However, they have been arranged in a marriage, and during one of this organization's rituals, our character attempts to perform the ritual as well and gets caught. And when this happens, the father of their groom says, okay, I think the best course of action would be to send them to a school for troubled women with violet eye disease. So essentially, there is a illness going around women with violet eyes that is causing them to act out, and they are going to the school for treatment and to become proper wives. Of course, we know that there's not really anything wrong with these women. We quickly learn that a lot of them are very feminist, they are queer, they might be autistic, they are just not the kind of women that men find socially acceptable. And as soon as our character arrives there, they are approached by some spirits of previous attendees of the school who have notified him that they were murdered there and that it is up to them to protect the other students there. Our character is also autistic, and it is very difficult for them to be in social situations. It's very hard for them to find their footing and for them to be in this new location and to have this big task of saving everyone dropped at their feet. Definitely leaves them a little bit overwhelmed. However, they have unexpected help from someone who I'm not going to mention because it's a little bit spoilery, but they end up being one of my absolute favorite characters. Andrew Joseph White is very talented when it comes to body horror. So if you are squirmy about that, their books are probably not for you. I myself quite enjoy body horror, so that's why their books work so well for me. This definitely has that constant creepy, suffocating feeling throughout the entire story. It's very clear that danger is around every corner and that our character could be caught and severely punished at any moment. And so the stakes are incredibly high, and our character is definitely in a very vulnerable position throughout this entire story. So it can be very difficult to read, but if you are looking for those darker horror vibes, this is still young adult, but for young adult, it's pretty extreme. This is definitely the book. Also, if you like ghosts, spirits, school/asylum settings, then this is definitely going to go ahead and tick off all those boxes. Up next, a classic for a fall recommendation list, we have A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is a retelling of Dracula, though not really a retelling, but it is heavily inspired by Dracula, in which we are reading letters from Constanta, his first bride, as she kind of explains what led up to her and his other brides tearing him apart and killing him. This is definitely the kind of book you want to pick up if you're looking for just immaculate fall spooky vibes. The writing is just lush and haunting, and so it is definitely perfect for a cool fall evening with lighted candles, spooky ambiance video. It'll definitely 100% give you all of the vibes. I don't often tab my books, but the writing in here was just too immaculate not to do so. This is a well-beloved story for a reason. I think a lot of people really appreciate not just the writing, but the commentary on abusive relationships. Constanta is obviously in an abusive relationship with a man that she loves very much, and it takes her years to realize that this relationship is so problematic. And in fact, it kind of takes until the other people join the relationship and she starts to recognize their mistreatment as having a lot of similarities to her treatment, for her to realize just exactly how terrible Dracula truly can be. It is not just the vampire vibes that give you the EBGBs, it is the abusive, manipulative, stronger partner who clearly has complete control over those around him. And just watching these people trapped in his web can be very unsettling, and watching them slowly gain the courage to turn against them was very inspiring. So this book has a romantic feel to it as well, because of the lyrical writing, but also because we watch Constanta's love for Dracula's second wife and first husband grow as well. So I think that this book really balances the horrors with these softer, tender moments. And so this book is absolutely perfect. People recommend it all the time. If you have not yet read it, highly recommend that you change that this year. Another book that if you haven't picked it up yet, it is time to change that ASAP, and that is going to be Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. This is one of the few queer books that really blew up. It is not very common for queer books to blow up the way this book did, and so it was just absolutely wonderful to see so many people fall in love with the story. This is once again a young adult queer story, and we are following Andrew, and he has returned to the private university with his twin sister, and he is very much looking forward to seeing their best friend Thomas. However, things this year are just a little bit off. People are acting a little different. His sister is kind of avoiding them. Thomas is acting weird. He showed up to school with blood on his sleeve, and his parents are missing. And Andrew finds himself a little overwhelmed by all of these changes occurring around him. He has very high anxiety. There's great anxiety representation in here. And as someone with anxiety, I definitely related to this character, but that's not the only reason I related to this character. This also has a sexual representation in it, and I personally felt it was really well done. As someone who is asexual, obviously asexuality is a spectrum, so it is different for everyone, but for me, I really related to Andrew. On top of all the stressors that Andrew is facing with these changes, as well as just high school life and bullies, Thomas is disappearing at night, and one day Andrew decides to follow him, and he finds Andrew fighting monsters in the woods they were told to avoid. And it turns out that these are monsters that Andrew created in his stories, and then Thomas drew them, and after he drew them, they came to life, and they're pretty bloodthirsty, and Thomas knows that if he lets them get out of the woods, they will hurt people that he loves. And there's few people he loves more than Andrew. However, Andrew decides to go ahead and help them, and things just get out of hand. They are just two lost boys, and there's only so much that two lost boys can go ahead and do against these monsters. If you like kind of dark, creeping stories with a lot of like nature horror, but you also have this oppressive feeling of a threat just growing closer and closer, and the safe spaces that you have are just disappearing moment by moment. We also have what I would consider a somewhat obsessive relationship between Andrew and Thomas. They are definitely pretty codependent on each other. It is clear that they are absolutely obsessed with each other, and neither of them is quite ready to admit that to the other. So we have that drawn out relationship occurring throughout the story that is just so delicious to watch. Definitely some body horror that occurs in here. I know even just this cover here creeps some people out, so sorry if that is the case for you and that you have to stare at this, but the writing in here is stunning. The atmosphere is perfect. I know that everyone is salivating for this author's next book because they have definitely proven themselves a very competent and accomplished author with this story. So if you haven't gotten to it yet, trust the hype. You can't always trust the hype, but with this one, I think that it is very rare for people not to like it. Another very popular queer author that has been blowing up in the last few years, we have Chuck Tingle, and specifically I want to talk about Camp Damascus. This is the first book of his that I checked out. I originally listened to it as an audiobook, and I would highly recommend the audiobook. I remember I started it and I had to like put it down for a few days because I was like hyperventilating a little bit because it was creeping me out so much. This is an adult horror, and in this book we are following a girl who lives in this town that is right next to a religious conversion camp, and they're very proud to be living next to this conversion camp because it has such a high success rate with converting queer people into straight people, which we all know you can't actually do. So clearly this camp is doing something a little bit fishy. This story starts with our character hanging out at the lake with her friends, and as she looks across the lake, she sees someone standing there, and it kind of weirds her out because she starts to see this person everywhere, and it starts to unravel that maybe our character has a closer relationship to this camp than she initially thought, and this kind of sets her on this journey to figure out what happened to her. The synopsis for this is pretty vague, so I really don't want to go too much into it. I will say that this has lesbian representation within it, so that is the queer rep, and obviously there are some queer side characters since we are dealing with victims of conversion therapy. I thought that the vibes of the story were horrifying. It is very rare for me to pick up a book that really scares me because I am so new to horror. I haven't really dug that deep into it, but this one definitely had me feeling a little bit queasy. I would say this is probably a better horror for people who are a little bit more advanced in the horror genre. This is probably the scariest book on this list that I am recommending. This story does have a slight sci-fi aspect to it. If you've ever read any of Chuck Tingle's other books, at least his horror, I'm not really sure about his funky romances that he's written in the past, but he always has a sci-fi aspect to it, and I thought that the aspect that he threw in here was rather interesting. So this is a very short book, but it's definitely one that packs a punch. So I think that if you are someone who really likes horror with just a hint of religious horror and someone who likes strong queer themes within their horror, then this is definitely going to be one worth checking out for you. Up next, we have a book I feel like I haven't mentioned in forever, which is a shame because it's a banger, and that is going to be Ace of Spades by Faraday Becky Emeti. This is another young adult book. This book is always described as Get Out meets Gossip Girl, which I think is a perfect comparison. Sometimes when they do comparisons to other media, you're like, well, like a smidge, but I feel like this is spot on for those two stories. And in this book, we are following two students who are at a very prestigious high school. We have Chiamaka and Devin. Yeah, Devin is his name. And they are, I believe, like the only two Black students at this school, and they are from very different lives. Chiamaka is from a very wealthy, successful family. However, Devin is essentially a scholarship student who is from the other side of the tracks. And at the beginning of the story, both of them are given the position of prefects, which Chiamaka is not surprised at all. She's been working towards this her entire high school career. Devin is rather surprised. He's a really good student, but he's definitely a loner, and he did not expect this at all. And shortly after they gain these positions, they start receiving text messages from someone called A. And these text messages are saying things that no one should know about our characters, and they are obviously really starting to freak out. This is a book that has a lot of commentary on racism, obviously, but it also talks about like economic status and the impact this has on people's lives and the way that they are treated and perceived by those around them. It is interesting because we have two Black students, one of them who definitely has a more privileged life. So it really kind of allows you to see the different levels of privilege and oppression that people can face throughout their life. And as far as the queer aspect, Chiamaka is, I'm not 100% sure she's bisexual. She ends up having a relationship with a boy, but she also ends up having and starting a relationship with a girl throughout the story. Devin, on the other hand, is openly gay throughout this story, so that is a queer rep in here. I would say if you like a story that has a almost outlandish ending, often what you find in like Jordan Peele movies, but yet that's what makes the ending so satisfying, then you're definitely gonna go ahead and find that in this book. The next book I want to talk about, I would probably save closer to the end of the fall season, going a little bit into winter, just because a lot of the story is set during winter, but because of its darker vibes, I think that it would be a good one to pick up during the fall season, and that's going to be Withered and Sear by TJ Klune. This is a duology, and it is, I would say, TJ Klune's darkest work, at least from what I have read by him, and I have read quite a bit. This is a post-apocalyptic story. It is set about 100 years after nuclear warfare ended humanity for the most part. And we are following a character named Cavallo, and Cavallo is a very broken man. He has had a very difficult life, and he has isolated himself in this old prison with his dog as well as an AI robot. And Cavallo is losing his mind. Throughout the story, it definitely gets worse and worse, but from the very beginning, he's not a mentally stable person, and he spends most of his time alone. However, he occasionally visits the small village that is near his prison to trade supplies and whatnot. One day while he is out hunting, he shoots a deer. However, it doesn't die right away, and he starts to track it, and it crosses into the territory of the dead rabbits. And the dead rabbits are a group of cannibals that live very close to the wastelands where radiation is still very high. These are people that are very sick, physically and mentally, and people like Cavallo and the people in the village that he visits try to avoid them at all cost. However, Cavallo needs this deer, and so he ends up going into their territory, and this leads him to meeting the Mute, who is a dead rabbit who had their vocal cords slit, had their throat slit, and so they are no longer able to speak. So on top of queer representation, it also has some disability representation in it as well. And Cavallo decides the best course of action is to kidnap this rabbit instead of killing him and bringing him back to the prison. And this sets off a series of very devastating events because this rabbit happens to be very important to the leader of the dead rabbits, and they will do just about anything, kill just about anyone to get him back. This story, I think, is really great for the fall season. It has a very bleak feeling to it, and it is not at all a very happy story. It has a smidge of romance, but I would say that the romance is rather dark and problematic. If you are a fan of the knife to the throat scene, which I know a lot of people are, that happens quite a bit between these two characters. There is also an age gap. This story is the kind of story that will have you feeling rather glum and will have you questioning if you should be rooting for characters. They are morally gray, leaning towards morally corrupt, to be honest, which I think is definitely great for the fall season where we want a little bit messier characters. So I would definitely say if you're looking for a post-apocalyptic setting, if you're looking for cult vibes, if you are looking for, I would almost say like a smidge of Mad Max vibes, then you're definitely gonna go ahead and find it in these stories. This is some of TJ Klune's older work, which I think is often overlooked, despite the fact that I personally like his older work a little bit more than his newer stuff. So I will always take the opportunity to shout it out. All right, next book is for my smut lovers, and this is kind of a 2-for-1 deal because I own book 1, A Lady of Rooksgrave Manor by Catherine Moon, but I do also want to highly recommend book 2, which is the Company of Fiends. And I personally, out of this trilogy, think book 2 is my favorite, but they are set up relatively similarly. That's a hard word to say, similarly. And in the first book, we are following a woman who is working for a wealthy household that's not so wealthy anymore, and they can't really afford to keep on their staff anymore. So she has been let go, and she approaches this doctor who had visited the mistress of her household and perform certain relaxation tactics on her. And she approaches him and lets him know that she's interested in hanging out with him. And after their time together, he suggests that she might be a good fit for Rook's Grave Manor, which is a brothel where human women will service monstrous men. And throughout the story, she gathers, I believe, 5 men by her side and falls in love with them, and they fall in love with her as well as each other. This is definitely for the reverse harem girlies. Book 2 is very similar, but it is set at the theater, where it is kind of similar, where we have human women with monstrous men. However, it is more of a public performance, obviously, hence the theater aspect, than this book, which is more private within the brothel. And in this book, our main character, she actually has a secret that she's not 100% human. I can't remember exactly what she is, maybe something somewhat fae-like, and this makes it so that she can handle rougher sex, and so she is used by the theater a little bit more frequently for some of their more exotic scenes. And she's getting a little bit tired. She's been doing this for about 8 years. However, as she's thinking about maybe moving on to other things, some of the women at the theater end up getting murdered. And so someone is stalking the people at this theater, and she and some of her past lovers and new lovers are looking into it, while simultaneously, once again, developing a really strong group dynamic. I'm not really going to talk about book 3 because I personally didn't really like it, but for these two, what I really liked about these stories is they're relatively long, which I think for reverse harem is really necessary, because you're developing so many relationships, not just between our main character and each individual men, but between the men, between each other as well. And so I like that we take a little bit more time with that, because I do enjoy a well-developed relationship. We get a ton of smut in these books. That is probably their primary purpose. I would say these are erotic stories, and I think that the smut is a 10 out of 10. It works really well for me. It's really diverse. The author is constantly mixing it up. We have different monsters in this one than we do in this one. We have all different types of beings with different appendages and talents that we get to explore throughout this story. It is just a really fun time. I really loved all of the characters and their relationships in these books. Since it is a monster romance, that obviously makes it better for the fall season. On top of that, there is this threat in the background of someone who also owns brothels. However, these brothels are not like Rook's Grave Manor. They are very dark, and they run, I would say, primarily by sex trafficking. So the people who are there do not want to be. So clearly our characters are making sure that this man does not get them in their grasp. But on top of that, they obviously also want to take him down and free the people who he has been holding prisoner. So it does have a slight dark aspect to it as well with that theme, especially in book 3, because the woman we are following in that was someone who was imprisoned by this man for a very long time. So another thing I really enjoyed is our strong female characters. Technically, even with our character in the second book being not fully human, the men are physically stronger because our character here is just human. But they don't really let that put them on the sideline or anything. They're like, no one puts me in the corner. I'm not gonna sit here and let you guys be threatened. They love their men so much that they are willing to like literally run into a burning building to get to them. And so I just had a lot of respect for these really strong, outspoken women and just the devotion they have to those they love. So these are really great if you want some fun, smutty monster romances. And they also have a historical setting to them, which once again, I always say historical settings for me give a little bit more fall vibes. 3 more books to go. Up first, we have Alpha of Mortal Flesh by Ben Alderson. This is the 3rd book in the Blood something Darkmoor universe. Completely wrong was I. And I know I've talked about the first book before, which is called Lord of Eternal Flames, which is a vampire and a witch romance. These are always gay. I got rid of the 2nd book, which was a Hades and Persephone retelling between a human and a fae, because Hades and Persephone is not a trope I like, and fae is also not a trope I like. But I want to go ahead and talk about this one, which I read the most recently. All of these, despite being in the same series, can be read as standalones, and this is a Red Riding Hood retelling, obviously, between a witch and a werewolf. In this book, we start off with our witch being married to someone who is very abusive. So just like A Dowry of Blood, this book does deal with abusive relationships. I would say that this one leans a little bit more towards the physical violence that partners inflict on each other. So a heads up for that. But we have a character who stumbles across this werewolf, and it's very clear that they're just not remembering something throughout this book. If you like the amnesia trope, it's kind of similar to Amnesia, but it's more like someone has kind of messed with their memory kind of situation. This book has that. Obviously, we have werewolves. Those definitely give fall vibes. I would say Red Riding Hood gives fall vibes. I can just see her skipping through the fall forest with her basket of apples kind of situation. This book, I would say, focuses on revenge a lot. We have Calix, our werewolf, and he had something very important taken from him many years ago, actually at the hands of Rory, our witch's husband. And our wolf actually ends up kidnapping Rory in hopes of forcing his husband's hand to come and save him, so he has the opportunity to kill him. And while he has Rory in his grasp is when the two of them inexplicably get drawn closer and closer. So this does have kind of the kidnapping and falling for your kidnapper trope. I would say this is definitely a relatively long story, but because it has so much going on with it plot-wise, as well as a very slow burn romance, it is definitely worth the page count that we receive in here. I will admit that I can be a bit of a softie when it comes to redheads. I'm kind of thinking of Thomas from Don't Let the Forest In as well. So this book worked really well for me. If you like a paranormal monster romance with a good plot of murder and revenge, then this would definitely be worth your time to pick up this season. Second to last book, we have The Beloved Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This is a young adult story featuring a young trans man who is part of a family that can commune with the spirits. And I believe they also kind of help spirits pass on to the next life. And they have very gendered roles within their family, within their community. And as a trans boy, our character really wants to prove that he is a true bruja. And so our character Yadriel sets out to perform a ritual where he summons the ghost of someone who was found to be missing in hopes that he could figure out what happened to them. But the ritual doesn't quite go as planned because he ends up summoning Julian, not Justin, Julian, who is his school's a bad boy. And he didn't know Julian was dead, and Julian didn't know he was dead either, but clearly he is. And Julian is demanding that Yadriel helps him figure out who killed him. So the two of them set out to figure out what happened to Julian and if it has anything to do with this missing person that Yadriel was looking into. This does start to develop a little romance between the two of them. It has really strong family and community vibes. It has that great Hispanic culture, especially when it comes to the food. What is it about Hispanic authors always talking about food? I'm always leaving these books like so hungry, like everything they describe. I'm like, I just gotta go make some food or go to a Mexican restaurant or something, because you're just talking about such good food. And while it is dealing with darker themes, I think the fact that it is young adult and kind of a coming of age story, it kind of lightens the story a little bit more. So that makes it great if you're looking for not a scary fall book, but definitely one that has all of the fall vibes that you are wanting. All right, everyone, we are getting into our 13th spooky book. And this one is going to be Silver Under Nightfall. This one also has poly representation. It is by Rin Chupeco. It is the first book in a duology. In this book, we are following Remy, and he is a vampire hunter, and he is the son of a very notorious and wealthy vampire hunter. However, his mother had turned into a vampire after she gave birth to him. So there is speculation that he himself might be part vampire, and that has left him very ostracized from the rest of the vampire hunters, despite him being essentially like the best. And one day he ends up fighting this vampire that's just not quite right. It just won't die the way other vampires do. It's stronger, it's faster. Something weird is going on. And then there is also a murder within the guild of the vampire hunters, and everything just gets a little bit out of hand. He ends up getting approached by Song and Xaden, who are both vampire royalty, and they are a couple, and they are looking to create peace between vampires and humans, and they're hoping that by helping the humans figure out how this murder happened, what's going on with these super strong vampires, they're hoping that'll help the queen convince the rest of society to live side by side with vampires. And they end up realizing Remy is definitely the best one to help them with this job. And so the three of them set out to clean up everyone else's mess, essentially. And while they are doing it, obviously the two of them start to drag Remy into their relationship, which he is sometimes very bewildered by. I had a really great time with this series, including the second book. I feel like a lot of people were a little bit disappointed by it. Do I think it could have been a little bit longer? Yes, I definitely think it could have, but I did like the direction that it took, and the ending of the overall series left me satisfied. I do love me a good vampire story, and I thought that there were a lot of aspects of the story that were very unique to vampire lore, which made this more interesting to read. I, of course, loved the characters, not just Remy, Song, and Xaden, but as well some of the side characters that they met along the way. I thought all the character relationships were really interesting, and just watching our characters fly across the land in their super fast vampire horse carriage was definitely a lot of fun and giving fall vibes. I think that this is definitely the kind of duology that you want to pick up this time of year. You're gonna have lots of vampire battles, you're gonna have murder mysteries that you need to solve, you're gonna have some monster romance aspect to it as well. I think it just has a smidge of everything that you could be looking for this time of year. So definitely consider giving it a try. All right, guys, those are the 13 spooky books that I think you should consider checking out this season if you are looking for some great queer reads. Obviously, if you have any spooky season books that are queer that you want to recommend, leave them down below, because I am always looking for more books with these vibes. As always, guys, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.